stay way out of it. It's much the safest place to be. I mean, there are all sorts of issues and circumstances.
The British royal family has long since maintained its hold on traditions, which seem to be the bedrock of the institution itself. However, in recent times, we have seen a growing number of members of the royal family starting off on a mission for a more ordinary life. Before Harry's decision, it was Edward's, though neither of them took the same path. Edward's story was that of passion and quest for individuality. Join us as we take you through the details of these transformative events in Edward's life. Prince Edward was born on March 10, 1964, in Buckingham Palace to Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. As the bundle of joy completing their family of 4 children, he was perceived right from childhood to be quieter compared to his brothers and sister, especially when matched to the dynamic nature of the elder brother, Prince Andrew. His shy nature often didn't make him quite noticed, and thus he turned out to be the low-key among young royals. Also, Edward's childhood fully met all the conventions of being a member of the royal family. He spent the first few years of his life at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, being taken care of by nannies and tutors to secure a good education. Like his siblings, Edward attended Heatherdown Preparatory School in Berkshire, excelling at academics and demonstrating a burgeoning interest in extracurricular activities, particularly drama. As the public may have perceived him to be a quiet child, Edward had shown keen enthusiasm for creative expression even during his formative years. Later, Edward attended Gordonstoun School in Scotland, just like his father and brothers. Gordonstoun was notorious for its very demanding academic and physical program to build up resilience and character. While Edward did the outdoor challenges and community service projects at school, his passion lay in the arts. Drama became his means of escape from his introverted personality into more creative roles. It laid the groundwork for his interest in performance. After attending Gordonstoun, Edward went to Jesus College at Cambridge to study history and was awarded his Bachelor of Arts. His time in Cambridge gave him greater depth into his academic interests and also fostered his love of the arts. Immediately, he joined the university's Dramatic Society, trying to be involved in every production. While those performances were far from any type of royal duties, this fulfilled something deep within Edward, who wished to find some identity other than that which might traditionally be expected of a prince. Edward also served in the military for a short period, with the military being an institution with which his family's history was intertwined. In 1986, he went to the Royal Marines after university. It was a natural step in life for a member of the royal family, his father and brothers having served in the armed forces. Edward spent very little time in the Marines. It was only after a number of arduous sessions of training that he finally decided his temperament and ambitions were not fit for a military career. After he left the Royal Marines, Edward was criticized by the media. Yet Edward stepping away was testimony to his choosing a path aligned with personal passion rather than public expectations. Edward had been fairly consistent in his childhood passions for acting and the theater. This even led him to work for Andrew Lloyd Webber's Really Useful Theater Company. All this involvement with theater marked another peculiar digression from what was otherwise anticipated for someone of his status in the royal family. As such, though his endeavors in the arts did not actually materialize into any permanent professional career, it spoke volumes about his resolve to follow his passion. As ambitious as he was, Edward constantly had to live in the shadow of his elder brother, Prince Andrew. Andrew was a very outgoing character, and his active service in the Falklands War drew much attention and admiration from the public. In comparison, Edward's quiet nature and less orthodox pursuits often relegated him to the background. Edward seemed to accept his role as the more subdued royal, not seeking the limelight. While Andrew's exploits would often be headlined, Edward concerned himself with building his interests and keeping a lower profile. The impression that Edward lived in his brother's shadow was furthered by the different ways in which the two brothers handled the ups and downs of life as members of the royal family. Whereas Andrew was free-spirited, Edward was more introverted and a bit methodical. It was this difference that made him into the image he now has. He attached himself to causes dear to his heart, such as the performing arts, and thus found that he was going to make a relevant contribution, however small. As Edward grew into manhood, these early experiences would inform his approach to royal duties and public service. His quiet resilience and dedication to interests outside the spotlight proved his path, though less conventional, was no less important. Embracing his uniqueness and following his passions, Edward carved a special niche in this family, proving even the most silent voices can be profound in their effect. One of the big decisions in Prince Edward's life came in the mid-1990s. Contrary to the expectations for a senior member of the British royal family, Edward opted for a career in the media over many of his formal royal duties. This has been quite a bold move away from traditional royal expectations, allowing Edward to pursue his passion professionally. The highlight of Edward's career in the media industry was when, in 1993, he formed his own production company, Ardent Productions. The purpose of this company was to focus on the production of top-quality documentaries and dramas with educational and historical themes in mind. The venture was designed with the ambition to create works that appeal to many while cultivating his determination to tell stories. As time went by, Ardent Productions rolled out a number of projects, with many based on history and cultural matters. Notable productions from the company include Edward on Edward, a documentary where Edward looked into the life and legacy of King Edward VIII, his great-uncle who had abdicated the throne in 1936. The candid portrait gave a glimpse into the life of this very controversial monarch because it combined Edward's personal relation to his subject with the general historical narrative. This was very well appreciated as it provided depth to those interested and an especially unique perspective on this segment of royal history. Ardent also produced a collection of varied documentaries considering global issues and those looking at cultural studies. One of their productions, Crown and Country, gave insights into some historic sites within the United Kingdom relating to times, persons, or other fascinating issues relating to the monarchy. In this manner, Edward attempted to represent history as alive, tangibly felt, and digestible for the contemporary audience. His work as an executive producer sometimes extended on screen as he provided voiceovers or hosted series that further outlined his hands-on approach. Despite the creative imagination and work Edward had invested in Ardent Productions, his media career received quite varied responses. Though many appreciated his breaking out of the mold and pursuing interests that truly meant something to him, others were less forgiving. Critics wrote him off as an indulged prince who dabbled in an industry that he knew little about, painting him as more of a figurehead than a serious producer. Added to that was a perception the prince's royal status presented him with opportunities other hopeful media professionals could only dream of. This invited doubt into the validity of the endeavor. Though Ardent Productions made efforts to churn out a string of content, several projects failed to secure significant returns. When the company eventually struggled on financial grounds, it became another reason for people to say Edward was an amateur in the field. In some cases, broadcasters have steered clear of hiring Ardent because they are concerned that being associated with a venture headed by a member of the royal family will eclipse them. Edward's identity as a prince and a producer brought with it some challenges he could not completely get away from. For instance, the public expectation of him as a royal clashed with his need to be taken seriously in the media business. He also involved himself with some productions seen by some as self-serving, since he used his royal status to advance his presence on screen rather than relying on his talent and value as a creative professional. All these criticisms eclipsed Edward's genuine interest and enthusiasm, which he put into his work. This notwithstanding, all wasn't exactly bad for Edward with Ardent Productions. This commitment to historical and cultural programming left a mark on an appreciative audience for the content the company produced. Again, Edward's foray into the media spoke volumes about taking risks, and going in a direction that generally was contrary to expectations, hence him standing out from others in the family. That he chose to make this route, despite the many pitfalls along the way, shows his determination in the quest to carve out a unique identity apart from what conventionally defines royal duties. By the early 2000s, Edward found himself under increasing pressure to reassess his role both within the royal family and the media world. Ardent Productions continued to face financial and operational difficulties, while Edward's involvement with the company continued to attract increasing criticism from both the press and the public. He stepped back from active involvement in Ardent in 2002 to signal the shift in priorities. Ardent would finally run its course and shut its doors in 2009, which brought a close to Edward's foray into the media world. In retrospect, Edward's career in the media wasn't exactly successful and came with a lot of baggage. It wasn't the enduring success that he might have wished to have it, but gave him the opportunity to indulge his interests and push the boundaries placed upon him as a prince. Criticism that he faced underlined some of the challenges in a delicate balancing act of a royal identity with personal ambitions, which only a few have dared to try. Ultimately, in more ways than one, it is a milestone that Edward even dared to break into the media industry to begin with, and willingly courted risks and explored his interests on his terms alone. While his attempt wasn't really successful, it revealed a side of his attempt to reach out in creative individualism amidst all the public scrutiny. His story is another reminder that children of privilege have to find their own way and go through trials and learn from the choices they make. Probably the most unorthodox step that Prince Edward has ever made in his life was creating Ardent Productions. Just like many of the media activities Prince Edward has undertaken, his move into production came with a series of controversies. It did not only come from the public and industry professionals, but also from the members of the British royal family who were particularly concerned about the nature and content of his work. The big bones of contention were that some of Edward's productions seemed to show too much about what went on behind the scenes in the royal family. Such projects as Edward on Edward, dealing with the life of his great-uncle King Edward VIII, were seen as trespassing on a sensitive territory. Of course, it did contribute toward making history, but some of the members of the royal family believed that his ambition had resulted in washing the family's dirty laundry in public. This royal family is known for its protectiveness around the details that surround their existence, and they look at Edward's media work as a breach of that guarded discretion. Things seemed to worsen with the other productions dealing with anything to do with royal history or any events relating to the monarchy. While Edward tried to place such narratives in a wider historical perspective, the critics considered these creations had inadvertently aired a part of the royal family which was best kept private. The royal family's apprehension finds its roots in Edward's privileged position, which allows him access to private stories about family anecdotes and experiences, which merges historical narration with personal exposure. These tensions led to quiet reproaches from within the family, with the older royals making known their displeasure about his creative choices and what these choices portended. In addition to the pressures coming from the family, there was also criticism coming from the other professionals within the industry. Colleagues within the media continued to accuse him of exploiting his royal connections to get special treatment. They would argue his ability to secure top-tier content or even information that no other producers knew, and as such, put him on an uneven playing field above his peers. The perception of nepotism has always been the reason why Edward felt isolated from his fellow workers, since many thought that Edward would never have been seriously considered as a producer in the first place were he not royalty. Skepticism was not just limited to how Edward could get his hands on royal secrets, it even extended to the way he worked, which was under scrutiny. Insiders often questioned whether Edward's royal heritage opened up resources and opportunities to him that were unavailable to anyone else. That would include access to exclusive networks, influential connections, and locations that most regular producers could only dream about. The possibility of such advantages created jealousy among peers who viewed his career as representative of privilege rather than merit. The criticism was not only coming from within the family, but also from the outside media industry, hence building pressure on Edward. This increased the pressures that he was under as he was torn between gratifying his artistic drive and satisfying his royal lineage. Every new project meant another wave of attacks, which were bound to seize upon any mistake or overreach. The roar built up as production started to become too close for comfort when it came to the private affairs of the family. Discussion in royal circles began to become increasingly critical, with the senior members urging Edward to rethink the implications of his work. Also, Edward faced rising pressure from the public and his colleagues to prove himself beyond his position as a member of the royal family. With persistent questions regarding Edward's legitimacy as a producer in the media business, the number of people who were willing to work with him continued to erode. The majority of views around the industry labeled his work as no more than a byproduct of his royal privilege, rather than a product of his efforts or talent. This did not sit well with him, considering he started doing this for the passion attached to art and its potential impact. All these tensions together brought Ardent Productions into a pretty uncomfortable situation. Edward had found himself at a crossroads as he neither could fulfill the expectations of the royal family nor find acceptance within the competitive media world. The criticism he received at both ends hurt his image besides causing major operational trouble in the company for him. With the mounting pressures, there was barely any work coming in for the company, and this led to some serious financial troubles for the company. As a result, it was hard to keep things going. It seemed to many that both the weight of the scrutiny from the royal family and the dismissive nature of the film industry gave no room for Edward to actually prove himself. All this meant was that his royal identity finally came into irreconcilable conflict with professional ambition, and the very viability of Ardent Productions was growing increasingly in the wrong direction. Edward completely disengaged from any role with the company in 2002. A retreat from the media world he had embraced so warmly was finally complete. In this decision, aside from difficulties with operations for Ardent, it was also time for one of the salutary realizations of how difficult it was being a prince and a producer. Ultimately, in 2009, the company folded up, and with it, Edward's business foray into the world of media. Essentially, the downfall of Ardent Productions was the result of years of pressure building on all sides. Whether it was the royal family's conservatism or skepticism by the industry about his intentions, Edward's wish to be able to have a career in media always seemed to face opposition. His efforts were not illegitimate, but such a position did come with its fair share of challenges to be dealt with. Although criticized and finally closed down, Edward's tenure in the media world showed a lot of guts and a willingness to go against the norm to pursue personal passions. His experiences form a rich balance of individuality with the responsibilities of royal life, and offer a nuanced look at the challenges those born into privilege face while trying to forge their own paths. But against the turbulence of the prince's media ventures, and against the pressure put on him as a representative of the Windsor House, he found love with Sophie Rhys-Jones. After they courted, Edward then married her, becoming another instance where he gained media attention for the way that he sought to conduct his life, which many deemed unconventional. Despite these pressures, the union of the lovers proved a haven of stability and love in his otherwise very troubled life. Edward first met public relations professional Sophie at a charity function in 1993. Unusual for most royal romances, which can all too often be weighed down with formality and press expectation, their relationship blossomed naturally out of common interest and mutual respect for each other. It worked well as Sophie's bubbly personality and strong identity fitted nicely with Edward's more muted and introspective nature. It was a relationship that took its time in its early stages, with much of that time away from the scrutinizing public eye, building an excellent foundation in trust and companionship. But when news about their relationship broke, Not a single minute was wasted by the press poring over each detail of their courtship. Sophie was an instant target for tabloid speculation, as scarcely anyone was ready to pronounce her fit for royal life, with comparisons being drawn to Edward's mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and his sister-in-law, Princess Diana. The media hounded her relentlessly, more often than not veering into intrusion, digging into Sophie's past and personal life with unprecedented fervor. Edward had grown increasingly hostile to the media, and in the highly unusual step for a royal, he issued a statement attacking the press for targeting Sophie. He said that the press should leave him and Sophie alone, and that their relationship was between the two of them. His address generated a lot of sympathy. However, some critics believed Edward was private to a fault and resisted the public nature of the job. Because he is a member of the royal family, they countered, that his private life is one in which the public is interested, and trying to keep it private only serves to whet appetites for more. Things started becoming unbearable when photographers started following Sophie, taking pictures of her doing all sorts of everyday things. It was this frustration that broke Edward's silence, and he came out openly, calling out the press for not showing enough decency. While some praised his readiness to defend Sophie, others found him out of character in that he didn't have the stoicism that normally defines the royal family and its reactions to public opinion. It was in this context that the chronic media conflict with Edward developed and added yet another layer of complication to his already difficult relationship, not only with the public but also with the press. After all those challenges, the love between Edward and Sophie prevailed. In January 1999, the couple announced their engagement, which received mixed responses. Public interest was rife, and many were rejoicing at the news, although the press seemed to show no mercy as they scrutinized even the minute details of the wedding. Edward and Sophie did things a bit differently. They opted for a quiet, low-key ceremony at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, in June 1999, and avoided some of the pageantry commonly used in royal weddings altogether. The wedding between Edward and Sophie was basically a reflection of the desire for intimacy and authenticity. The guest list was smaller than that of other royal weddings, which are usually full of prominent figures. Sophie wore a stunning silk organza by Samantha Shaw, completed with a modest yet equally stately tiara from the Queen. Public though it was, the ceremony was not as big as his sister's wedding and reflected that they had wished for a more intimate engagement. The simplicity of the wedding came with praise as people felt it was indeed an alternative way of looking at the royalty. However, many traditionalists felt that this was a deviation from a supposedly grand royal affair. Edward and Sophie, however, just shrugged at comments and continued on their life together. The two of them soon got into the routine of a married couple, living their busy lives divided between the duties of royalty and other activities that lean more towards their personal pursuits. They settled at Bagshot Park in Surrey, a haven sprawled in tranquility well away from prying eyes. Soon they committed to building a family of their own. They have two children, Lady Louise Windsor, born in 2003, and James Viscount Severn, born in 2007. The styling of the children's titles reflected their parents' more modern approach to royal life, as Edward and Sophie eschewed the traditional prince and princess titles for their offspring. With hands-on parenting, Edward and Sophie ensured their kids lived lives that were as normal as possible, given the terms that came with their royal condition. They emphasized education and personal development, humility, understanding, and service to the nation. These siblings lived most of their lives outside, well away from the camera gaze, thanks to very close protection from their parents and their representatives. The marriage between Edward and Sophie was a stabilizing factor in his life and gave him a new lease on life. Sophie, poised and practical, proved to be a solid partner, offering support and understanding as Edward went through the challenges of his royal role and media aspirations. Her serene nature and capacity to attract people to her had promptly made her beloved to all in the general public, as well as the members of the royal house. Thus, she is one of those most reliable and committed members of the monarchy. Together, Edward and Sophie weathered the storms of public and family pressures and came out strong and united. Their marriage, though itself not without its challenges, would be a living testimony of shared commitment and resilience. Over time, they have carved their niche within the royal family, balancing tradition with modernity and maintaining a focus on being parents and public servants. The love affair between Edward and Sophie could be marked as one that would indeed last forever, with both of them standing side by side. It really does show that even at a time of heavy scrutiny and expectations by people above them, there was room to find comfort and take a great deal of strength in each other. Their journey, characterized by simplicity and being truthful, has set up new standards for modern marriage, combining tradition with a sense of freshness and identity. Right up to this very day, Prince Edward maintains his legacy as a character of quiet determination and adaptability within the ranks of the British royal family, who marvelously balanced this with trying to keep his family life private and as normal as possible. He speaks articulately to that balance between modernity and tradition, taking from heritage, brought up by his parents, but forging the path best fitted for one's unique personality and situation in life. When Edward took up his father's title, the Duke of Edinburgh, following the death of Prince Philip, it came with much meaning and responsibility. Being the custodian of his late father's legacy, it fell upon Edward to oversee such initiatives that were close to Prince Philip's heart, like the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which has changed countless young lives across the world. The new post came with increased responsibilities to the public, all of which Edward responded to with characteristic dedication and humility. This has run right through Edward's approach to family life, as he and his wife Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, have sought to keep the homely environment as normal and private as possible for their children, Lady Louise Windsor and James, Viscount Severn. Indeed, the couple has been protective in trying to keep their children out of the fierce public spotlight, giving them ample time and space to grow up and develop their personalities. Edward and Sophie raised their children in service and duty. They brought up Lady Louise and James in the understanding of their position within the royal family, yet free to pursue interests and ambitions, all in a bid to shield them from the challenges that Edward had to face growing up. That has been an important balance to strike if one wants to have any form of normalcy and stability within the royal family. Publicly, Edward has become much more visible, taking on an increasing number of engagements and representing the monarchy at high-profile events. He is particularly committed to causes concerned with the development of young people, the arts, and education, reflecting his own interests and desires to make a useful contribution. His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh has continued to oversee the relevance of the Duke of Edinburgh's award and its reach so more and more young people can enter into the award. Yet, despite the ramped-up public duties, Edward has not sacrificed family life, which he always vowed to protect. He and Sophie stay at Bagshot Park, the Surrey haven from prying eyes, where they forge a way of life that can balance the pressures of royal duty with their own personal priorities, fashioning an environment for their family while still attending to the demands placed on them as working royals. That Edward has managed to work his way through these dual responsibilities is testimony to his resilience and adaptability. He has been in a position to discharge his royal obligations with dignity while maintaining the privacy and integrity of family life, balancing that one appreciation and respect. While one may argue that Edward's continual service to the monarchy should follow the path left by his father, he is quite modern in his approach, as he marries tradition to the demands of modern living. Let us know your take on Edward's decision in the comments, and be sure to return for our next video.